The defining question is whether the discrimination is creating equity or inequity. If discrimination is creating equity, then it is anti-racist. If discrimination is creating inequity, then it is racist. In other words, discrimination is not bad. He famously said, the only cure to past discrimination is present discrimination. The only remedy for present discrimination is future discrimination. Author Coleman Hughes stopped by The View, hung out with the panelists there. The View is just a gold mine for viral clips like this. And of course, it's typically far left leaning, and even kind of the like token Republicans on The View don't really represent the majority of conservative thought out there. Coleman Hughes is an interesting guy because even though they claim that he's a conservative, at one point in this, he makes the point, I'm a contributor for CNN. I've never voted for a Republican for president, that he's kind of a centrist, and he's trying to think carefully through race relations in America. And what seems to have happened is we had a couple decades of really pushing this idea that in our personal lives, as well as in our public, our policy making publicly, that we should strive to be colorblind. Now, this doesn't mean that we're just completely unaware of race or ethnicity. That is impossible. Yeah. However, it does mean that that's not what we take into consideration with both our personal decisions of who we're in relationship with, how we treat people, who we work with, who we hire, and that we don't take that as the primary thing in consideration when we make public policy, that we do what Dr. King asked us to do, which is to look at the content of character, not at the color of skin. Now, over about the last 10 years, we have reversed course on that. Starting really in 2013, the racial consciousness of most ethnicities dramatically rose. And we've seen the effects of that as we have become less satisfied with race relations. And there's been more division than we've seen in a very, very long time. And a real sad fact, and we'll look at this statistically, is race relations had hit kind of a peak in our culture. We still had a ways to go, of course, but it had really risen to an all-time high. And now we've kind of taken this tumble down. And so I want us to look at Coleman Hughes on The View talking about his new book, Pushing for a Colorblind America, and see what kind of pushback he gets from the panelists. Let's take a look.
First question that I should ask you to do is explain to folks what you mean by this. Arguments for a colorblind America. What do you mean when you say that?
So a lot of people equate colorblindness to I don't see race or to pretending not to see race. I think that's a big mistake. We all see race, right? And we're all capable of being racially biased. So we should all be self-aware to that possibility. My argument is not for that. My argument is that we should try our very best to treat people without regard to race, both in our personal lives and our public policy.
Of course.
And the reason I wrote this book, thank you. The reason I wrote this book is because in the past 10 years, it has become very popular to, in the name of anti-racism, teach a kind of philosophy to our children and in general that says your race is everything, right? And I think that is the wrong way to fight racism. And that's why I wrote this book at this time.
So he's about to get some significant pushback, but this is what most people believed for like my entire life. It isn't, again, until about the last decade that this has really snuck into society. And I think the majority of people still want to hold to some kind of ideal like this. At the same time, we've kind of been hoodwinked into supporting a lot of policies, a lot of ideology that says the exact opposite of this, that we should be deeply race conscious and we should build policy around that. He's about to get pushback from Whoopi Goldberg.
I'm sorry, baby. Yeah. Can I just point out that there is a reason for that? You know, when I went to school, getting any information about anyone's race was not taught. No history. There was no Black history. None of those things were taught. And here in America, 100 years ago, when I was a young woman, that's how people saw you. That's how they judged you. So I think I don't want to say it's your youth, but I think you have a point, but I think you have to also take into consideration what people have lived through in order to understand why there has been such a pointing of very specific racial things, like women couldn't get into colleges. If you were a black person, there were a lot of colleges wouldn't accept you, trying to equal the playing field. I think that's what a lot of folks have been trying to do. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
I think that's your experience, and that's valid. You know, as a counterpoint, when I was in 5th grade, we all watched Roots together.
Yeah.
So Whoopi's argument is a little bit confusing to me, because it's something like, when I was young, you know, and Whoopi's getting up there now, saying when I was young, things were bad. Race relations were bad. And Coleman Hughes is there saying, let's not do that anymore. Let's live colorblind. Let's not take people's race into consideration. He says at the very beginning, I am not saying that we don't talk about a history of racism. I'm not saying that we're not actually perceptively aware of the differences in race and ethnicity. What he's saying is, let's move into the dream that we've all had of a meritocratic system where everyone has an equality of opportunity, is resourced if they're disadvantaged, and then is able to pursue life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Whoopi's argument seems to be, you know, when I was young, things were really bad racially, and so we should do that now. Like, I think things, we were like really aware of race, and there was a lot of racist policies, and so let's keep doing that. You know, he's like, because we did that, we should move towards this new ideal. Because we did that, we should move forward with everyone having a real shot. And what this conversation is going to end up getting down to is the idea of equity versus equality. Equality is really what the nation's ideals were built on. We were pushing forward towards a more perfect union. And of course, we have the hideous stain of real racism, institutionalized slavery in our country that we have to contend with. We have to make sure we talk about and we teach about, and we teach it in a historical framework where we understand why the world operated that way, how hideous it was, and why we should never go back to that, this racial essentialism. The problem is that we're no longer pushing equality of opportunity. We're now pushing equity, which is based on ensuring equality of outcome. And equality of outcome is just not a naturally occurring event. You see this across all of human history, the distribution of talent, the distribution of money, the distribution of almost any given resource or idea just doesn't fall equally. And to ensure equity, that everyone gets the exact same outcomes, you have to discriminate against the natural distribution. If there's a naturally uneven distribution, you have to discriminate against that distribution, which technically means discriminating against people almost always, in order to ensure that. And this is what he pushes against in his book, is the new ideas around race pushed by people like Ibram X. Kendi. See, here's one of the quotes from How to Be an Anti-Racist, Ibram X. Kendi's book. He says, the defining question is whether the discrimination is creating equity or inequity. If discrimination is creating equity, then it is anti-racist. If discrimination is creating inequity, then it is racist. In other words, discrimination is not bad. He famously said, the only cure to past discrimination is present discrimination. The only remedy for present discrimination is future discrimination. The idea of equity is to intentionally discriminate against anyone who ends up on the high side of an uneven distribution, regardless of whether or not everyone was giving the same opportunity. And the easiest way to do that throughout human history is through the immutable characteristic of race. What Hughes is pointing towards is the actual idea of Martin Luther King Jr., which was a Bill of Rights for the disadvantaged, agnostic of race or ethnicity, that if we will take care of those who are disadvantaged, which could in some circumstances, and we'll look at that in this interview with The View, it could in some circumstances point disproportionately at certain ethnic groups. However, it will encompass everyone. So if we want to live in a world of discrimination, we will live in a world seeking equity. If we want to live in a world of freedom and opportunity, equal opportunity for everyone, an even playing field, then we will look for equality. Okay, let's look at this next clip from The View.
My overall argument is that class, socioeconomics is a better proxy for disadvantage. We all want to help the disadvantaged. And the question is, how do we identify them, right? The default right now in a lot of areas of policy is to use Black and Hispanic identity as a proxy for disadvantage. And my argument is that you actually get a better picture of who needs help by looking at socioeconomics and income. That picks out people in a more accurate way. Right? So,
not my question, but when you say that socioeconomics picks out people in a better way than race, when you do look at the socioeconomics, you see the huge disparity between white households and Black households. You see the huge disparity between white households and Hispanic households. So your argument, and I've read your book twice because I wanted to give it a chance, your argument that race has no place in that equation is really fundamentally flawed, in my opinion.
Well, there's two separate questions. One is whether each racial group is socioeconomically the same. That I agree with you. They're not.
Yeah, they're not. And the stats show that.
Yeah, of course, I agree with that fully. The question is, how do you address that in the way that actually targets poverty the best?
Great.
And what Martin Luther King wrote in his book, Why We Can't Wait, is he called it, we need a Bill of Rights for the disadvantaged. And he said, yes, we should address racial inequality. Yes, we should address the legacy of slavery. But the way to do that is on the basis of class. And that will disproportionately target Blacks and Hispanics because they're disproportionately poor, but it will be doing so in a way that also helps the white poor, in a way that addresses poverty as the thing to be.
It's really interesting to me, first of all, that Coleman Hughes is getting way more robust applause on The View than The View hosts. Like, you just feel this natural inclination for people in America to go, yeah, that's right. Like, let's take care of the disadvantaged and let's not target people out by race, because targeting people out by race and creating policies discriminatorily has not gone well for us in the history of our country. You see, what the host is failing to recognize is the difference between the necessity of statistics to understand broad ideas and how that actually integrates into policies that affect everyday Americans on an individual level. In other words, statistics demonstrate what is true in the aggregate, while policy affects people as individuals. And one of the issues of breaking things down by immutable characteristics is you're taking something like race and making policies off of them when there are no such things as univariable issues and univariable solutions. So, for example, we know statistically that the most disadvantaged people in our country, if we're going to go correlation, causation based on statistics, are people who grow up in single parent homes, specifically in fatherless homes. Fatherless homes correlate to like every single bad statistic that you can possibly find. Dropping out of high school, teenage pregnancy, criminality, drug use, every single thing, domestic abuse later in life, everything you don't want your kids to grow up and experience correlates most at the highest level to fatherless homes. And fatherless homes are not a Black or white issue, although we can see statistically across all ethnicities who has the highest percentage of fatherless homes. And a lot of that comes down to cultural issues, religious issues. I mean, you can break this down by so many different variables, and race is just simply a very low definition way of creating policy. Policy affects people as individuals. It might be helpful to think of this, not in terms of like the entire country and every single policy issue that we have, but instead to just think of it in a smaller framework, like at one high school. In one high school, it might be true that in the aggregate, a certain ethnicity of students are doing worse in the aggregate on the standardized testing than the others. However, what's true on the individual level is there are kids of all race and ethnicities who are struggling in that school. And so if you say we are only going to target advantages and help towards this one specific minority of students, then you are actually leaving behind other individuals. If you're only going to target Hispanic students because in the aggregate they have the lowest score on some test, then you are leaving behind Asian students who are also struggling and below the average, white students, Black students. Indian students. I mean, you're taking and you're looking at the aggregate and making policies that are going to hurt individuals. If instead you just look at the disadvantage, who is struggling, who's behind, who didn't have a good education at the elementary and middle school level, who missed school because of COVID, who had to go work during certain times because they live in a single parent household, and you just target every kid who's below the standard, then you're focusing now not on an immutable characteristic that just by definition will be discriminatory. Instead, you're just addressing the actual problem. Now, they really couldn't get past his argument because it's bulletproof and it's how the world has grown successful over time and how we got to a place where we were actually improving rapidly in our race relations. And so then they just started attacking him personally and calling him a charlatan and saying he's a pawn of the right-wing politicians. And this is kind of, in our culture right now, how things break down. If somebody can't defeat your argument, they will just throw, and he's going to say it, an ad hominem attack. That is a to the man attack. I'm going to attack you because I haven't been able to defeat your argument.
Your argument for color blindness, I think, is something that the right has co-opted. And so many in the Black community, if I'm being honest with you, because I want to be, believe that you are being used as a pawn by the right and that you're a charlatan of sorts.
He's not a Republican.
So how do you?
He's never voted for a Republican.
You've said that you're a conservative.
No.
No, you did. You actually said that podcast that you did 2 weeks ago.
I said I was a
He's
conservative.
He's not.
Yes, you did. So, but my question to you is, how do you respond to those critics?
Okay, let's give it a
So, first thing I think it's very important. The quote that you just pointed out about doing something special for the Negro. That's from the book Why We Can't Wait that I just mentioned.
Yes.
A couple paragraphs later, he lays out exactly what that something special was.
Yes.
And it was the Bill of Rights for the Disadvantaged, a broad class-based policy.
But he also says you must include race.
No, he didn't. He says it's
Yes, he does.
Okay, well, everyone should go read the book Why We Can't Wait. Let's not get sidetracked by that.
Yeah.
I don't think I've been co-opted by anyone. I've only voted twice, both for Democrats. Although I'm an independent, I would vote for a Republican, probably a non-Trump Republican if they were compelling. I don't think there's any evidence I've been co-opted by anyone, and I think that's an ad hominem tactic people use to not address really the important conversations we're having here. And I think it's better, and it would be better for everyone if we stuck to the topics rather than make it about me with no evidence.
I want to give you the.
So he goes on to just rattle off, like, I work for CNN. I've never voted Republican in my life, just credential after credential after credential, and stands his ground beautifully. He's just going, look, you're trying to disparage the facts I'm making by pointing out things that you think are wrong about me as a human being. And that is an ad hominem attack. And it's the genetic fallacy. It's saying we can't trust your information because it's coming from you. Well, the information is either true or it's not, regardless of who's delivering that information. How does the ancient wisdom of Scripture tell us that we should look at our fellow man? We first see at the very beginning, God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them male and female. And so the most base part of us is our soul, and all of us are created in the image of God. Our race is not the defining characteristic of who we are. God said to Samuel when he was looking for the next king, do not look at his appearance or his stature because I rejected him. Humans do not see what the Lord sees, for humans see what is visible, but the Lord sees the heart. And of course, we have one of my favorite verses of all time, really one of the verses that changed the trajectory of the world and led us to a place where race, gender, and class was coexisting, is when Paul told the Galatians, there is no Jew or Greek, slave or free, male or female, since you are all one in Christ Jesus. And so we have been made one, a new nation. Peter even says a new race, a holy priesthood, all through faith in Jesus. I want to look lastly at this poll from Gallup. And what you're going to see is race relations over time. You can see back in 2001, would you say race relations between white and black people are very good, somewhat bad, or very good? Here's the percentage of very or somewhat good. Way up in the 70s. This is actually in 2001, where black adults felt even better about race relations than white adults. And then that flipped, but stayed very close to each other through the 2000s. It all stays very high. I mean, we know our history in this country for race relations to be this good. They stay consistent. 2009, 2010, 2011, 2012, 2013, we're way up here in the high 60s, low 70s. And then you can see on the graph, it absolutely falls off of a cliff at 2013. And in 2013, this is the second election of Barack Obama, and things had changed in his own rhetoric. In 2008, he was, there's not a blue America, there's not a red America, there's not a Republican America, Democrat America, I'm going to be the president for all Americans. 2012 was more a coalition of the dispossessed. 2013, we have the rise of the Black Lives Matter movement. We have this heightening of racial awareness, racial conscious, and it just bleeds on. And now we're going lower and lower and lower. And we see by 2021 that our statistics are nearly cut in half for who feels somewhat or very good about race relations in America. And I think for us to get back to this, we do have to take some kind of an approach to say either the most important thing about us is going to be something deep and abiding, our soul, who God created us to be, or it's going to be something immutable and aesthetic, and we are going to make race the ultimate thing. And what we're going to do is reverse a course that started 2,000 years ago to create a society where all people could flourish together. And I believe we will find ourselves in a very, very dangerous place, as we have before when we decided to make race the defining feature of our culture. Enjoyed this video, make sure you are subscribed so you can stay up to date with all new content. And if you want early access, exclusive content, and monthly live Q&As, make sure to check out patreon.com/ClaytonTime.